Kael Veylor awoke in a space that felt half dream, half real, where every sense was veiled in a thin artificial fog, emotionless and clinical. The air carried the sterile scent of something aggressively disinfected, the smell of antiseptics drifted like the cold breath of a soulless medical machine. He opened his eyes slowly, only to be stunned by a blinding white light shining directly from the ceiling, an artificial brightness so flawless it was infuriating, as if it were designed not to illuminate but to emphasize the barrenness, the inhuman order, and the total control of the environment. The first sound he heard wasn't a voice but the deep humming of medical equipment functioning in its own detached rhythm, steady, emotionless, indifferent to whether the person inside was actually alive. That rhythmic machinery made Kael feel as if he were lying inside the belly of a massive beast, one that was alive and feeding on him as some sort of specimen. When he tried to move, his wrists and ankles were restrained not by chains or steel, but by bands of material that felt deceptively soft, yet impossibly firm. Every time he struggled, the restraints only tightened slightly, as if whispering, "Don't bother, you no longer have the right to move." A voice echoed through the ceiling's embedded speaker system, monotone, automated, and entirely devoid of compassion, as though reciting a pre-programmed script, patient conscious. Commencing cognition verification. The words pierced Kael like knives. He didn't remember where he was, why he was restrained, or what had happened. The last fragmented memory he could recall was a searing green burst from a plasma conduit, flashing red warnings across the Aravan's Hope's engineering bay, the AI's countdown, explosion imminent in 10 seconds, and then his own scream just before the escape pod triggered a deep anesthetic sequence. At that moment, a door on the left slid open with a pressurized hiss like the exhale of something that wasn't human. Two figures entered. No, two women, if they could still be called that. The first had skin that shimmered like turquoise metal beneath a white light, her hair cascading down her back like flowing strands of mercury. Her gait didn't quite touch the ground, impossibly graceful, as if even gravity made way for her. She wore a skin-tight uniform, not lewd or exposed, but technologically sleek, blending professionalism with an impossible elegance. On her chest, a nameplate flickered softly, Selya. The second had paler, almost luminous skin, and large, alert eyes. Her hair floated like it was underwater, weightless, and around her neck coiled a strip of living silk. It moved, breathed, and made subtle hissing sounds, like a sentient creature at rest. On her wrist was a small screen displaying the name Nyra, blinking as if introducing itself. Selya was the first to speak. Her voice wasn't warm, but carried a cadence that demanded attention. Beneath it was a subtle metallic layer, as though each word was filtered through a precision vocal interface. Cognitive response confirmed. "Welcome to Veridion Prime." Kael squinted, his chest heavy with unnamed questions. He looked around, searching for any hint that this was a medbay, a recovery chamber, or at least a rescue facility after a disaster. But all he saw was the cold white sterility, the indifferent lighting systems, and two impossibly beautiful, impossibly perfect beings standing before him. He stammered, "Veridion Prime? Where the hell am I?" Nyra stepped closer, her gaze mischievous, though her voice delivered a chilling truth. "You're where existence isn't ended by death, it's reclassified. And according to our latest records, Kael Veylor, you are legally deceased." "No," Kael growled. He thrashed, muscles tensing. Memories came flooding back. The escape pod, the explosion, the final light, and then, nothing. There had been no tunnel of light, no mystic visions. Only clinic lighting, and now, this. Selya didn't blink. She extended a thin, sleek device more like a digital card. Its screen mirrored its text, "Death confirmed, 1403 UTC, per Galactic Standard Time. Below it, the cause read, unknown origin accident, partial biomass disintegration, known neural activity detected within threshold parameters. You've been legally declared dead, she continued, voice unwavering, and under Clause 17b prime of the Post-Life Entity Act, you are entitled to the permanent services correction, post-permanent services of certified comfort agents. Kael's eyes widened. I survived. I'm not dead, you can't just declare me gone because of a scan, he shouted, his voice breaking in the sterile air. The bands gently tightened again, as if pacifying him. No need to panic, your status has been confirmed. He inhaled deeply. Something was terribly wrong. Not an accident. Not a mistake. His instincts as a systems engineer, someone who had worked with AI protocols and redundancy layers across hundreds of platforms, told him this wasn't a misfire. It was a process. A system. And he had become its center. After the initial shock of learning that he'd been officially declared dead, Kael lay still, sweat beading on his forehead despite the perfect room temperature. He didn't resist anymore, not because he accepted the truth, but because he understood, escaping this place would require more than screaming and struggling. He needed to understand the system. He needed to know who controlled this game, and what kind of game they were playing with a man who was still very much alive, yet declared otherwise. Selya tapped the control panel by the head of the bed, and the restraints loosened slowly. She leaned in closer to Kael, her voice soft but carrying a firmness that allowed no refusal. Please stand. We'll be taking you to the post-life reintegration sector. The next phase begins now that your consciousness has stabilized. Kael sat up, legs shaky. His bare feet touched the floor, a supple material that felt like cool skin, soft and eerily lifelike. He followed the two women through a long corridor, and as they walked, he began to notice the subtle strangeness in how everything functioned here. There were no doctors. No nurses. No guards. And yet the entire facility moved with seamless precision, as if the building was running itself, or more terrifyingly, was itself alive. On both sides of the corridor, sliding doors opened in total silence. Through one, Kael caught a glimpse of a man sitting across from two other comfort agents. The man's eyes were wide, his hands trembling as he repeated, "I'm not dead. I'm alive. I remember my daughter. I just want to call her." But the two women in front of him smiled gently, calmly, with a tenderness so suffocating it could drive one mad. Kael turned to Selya. "All these people, they are like me?" Selya nodded, never slowing her pace. "Most are, yes. Declared dead legally, with cause but without strong enough evidence to trigger a status reversal. So they are placed in post-life condition, a temporary limbo. Neither living nor dead. They are cared for, served, counseled, until a final classification is decided." Kael frowned bitterly. "And how long does that decision take?" Nyra glanced at him with a playful smirk. "Some wait 10 years. Some never get one. The Veridion Prime classification system isn't in a rush. Everything must be documented." Kael scoffed. "So death now comes down to paperwork." "Not just paperwork," Selya replied, and for the first time, her voice carried something close to emotion. "Here, paperwork defines reality. Who you are, whether you're alive or dead, what rights you have or whether you'll be isolated, it's not determined by biology anymore, but by administrative classification. Once you're listed as post-life, you lose access to all outer system interfaces. Your identity is frozen. Your accounts are suspended. Your DNA no longer matches any living registry. To the greater interstellar network, you no longer exist. Kael stopped cold. Suddenly, he felt that chill in his spine, not from the temperature, but from the horrifying truth beneath the glossy surface of this place. No one killed him. No one executed him. They simply reclassified him as deceased. And with that, everything vanished. They arrived at a wide, dome-shaped chamber. The ceiling towered like a planetary vault. At the center spun a slowly rotating bioorganic pillar, glowing with a steady pulse of light, like a heart, but a heart designed from protocols and regulations. "Welcome to the reintegration core," Selya said. "Where misclassified souls are prepared to accept their new reality." Kael squinted. "What is this, a prison disguised as a luxury spot?" Nyra stepped closer, smiling wide, and whispered into Kael's ear in a low voice tinged with subtle implication, "No, this is paradise for the ones who haven't fully died yet. And you're a VIP, Kael Veylor. Because you're a unique anomaly. And the system doesn't like anomalies." Her eyes slid over him, slow, deep, and with something not entirely professional. Perhaps it was curiosity. Or attraction. Kael turned away, heart beating slow and hard in his chest. He still didn't know what was coming. But he knew one thing: these two women weren't just legal comfort agents. They were something else, something more. And maybe, just maybe, they were the only ones who truly understood how this place worked, and why it had chosen him. Kael was taken to an area they called the Adaptive Observation Sector. But to call it that was to undersell what it truly was, a delicate balance of refinement and hidden menace. The resting chambers were furnished with flawless interiors, infused with a soft fragrance reminiscent of tropical worlds, and bathed in lighting that subtly adapted to one's mood. Even the walls displayed immersive visuals: oceans, mountains, floating cities suspended in alien atmospheres so realistic it could make one forget they were being held against their will. But Kael wasn't so easily deceived. He was a systems engineer who had once designed neural interface environments for emotion-based observation stations along the Fader Belt. He recognized every sensory layer for what it was: a psychological filter meant to soothe, a climate, lull, and ultimately, make one accept. In the days that followed, Selya and Nyra took turns assisting Kael, escorting him to diagnostics, introducing him to something called redefining the existential self, and even guiding him through a bizarre therapy called emotional affirmation, where he was made to read his own death certificate while under alpha wave modulation. Kael pretended to comply. He nodded, smiled, and stayed quiet when needed. But inside, he recorded everything. Every data panel, every procedural prompt, every soft screen form. He memorized them all like blueprints. One evening, as the simulated night sky filled the ceiling with starlight, Kael sat alone near the glass railing of his chamber. Nyra entered silently, not in her usual uniform. She wore a form-fitting black silk biosuit that glowed faintly with each breath. The living scarf around her neck, which usually twitched and hissed, now curled calmly like a sleeping pet. Nyra leaned against the railing beside him, saying nothing. Together, they stared into the galaxy map slowly rotating beyond the glass, each nebula pulsing like the heartbeat of the cosmos. Eventually, Kael broke the silence. "This place is designed to make you forget you're trapped. Maybe even make you grateful for it." Nyra smiled faintly, still gazing at the stars. "Most post-lifers don't realize that. You're one of the few who can stand outside the design and see the truth." "And what is that truth?" Kael turned to her. Nyra was quiet for a long time. Then, almost as if afraid to be overheard, she whispered, "Veridion Prime isn't just a post-life center. It's a classification hub for the entire interstar cluster. Every soul that passes through here is tagged, valued, defined, and sometimes, quietly erased. And the classification system, it doesn't just use data. It consumes it. It lives on decisions. It needs anomalies like you to survive, to maintain equilibrium. People like you, you're not victims. You're resources. Kael turned away, his heart thudding not from fear, but from the pieces finally falling into place, revealing the form of a monstrous, living machine. And what are you in that system? Nyra faced him, her eyes darker than a simulated night. We're the servants, yes. But also the observers. The ones who keep the balance. We care for the post-lifers, but we also monitor the anomalies. Some of us have other roles. What roles? To betray the system, when it goes too far? The room went still. Kael looked into her eyes, and in them, he saw weariness, an ocean of memories too heavy to carry. Like she had spent too long trapped in the loop of service, too long being the comforting hand to souls imprisoned in their own paperwork. He asked quietly, have you ever freed someone? Nyra stared at him for a long time, then replied softly, once. But he didn't survive the synchronization phase. The system erased him before I could pull him out. Kael exhaled. His chest tightened with the weight of knowing he was stepping into a death game, where every move was monitored, every decision logged, and every form could erase him from existence. But he would not turn back. He was human, a finite being in an infinite universe, and that alone made him dangerous to any system that thrived on control. He leaned in, eyes locked with Nyra's. If I wanted to find a way out, would you help me? Nyra didn't answer immediately. But the living scarf on her neck curled tighter, then relaxed, a silent signal of agreement. She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no. And for Kael, that was all he needed to know. He wasn't alone in this maze of the dead. When a system is built to operate flawlessly, what it fears most isn't error, it's free will. And when a human like Kael, someone declared dead yet still very much alive, thinking, resisting, exists within that system, his very presence becomes a ticking time bomb, a tear in the logic that no algorithm can predict or contain. After that night of conversation with Nyra, Kael was no longer passive. Inside him, a decision had crystallized. He would not wait to be reclassified, nor kneel before some neural scan or administrative review. He would find a way to escape Veridion Prime, not merely to survive, but to expose this place, to break the illusion of comfort, and if necessary, bring it all down. Because humans, with all their flaws, limitations, and emotions, cannot be reduced to sterile data entries or fed into a living machine with no soul. The next day, Selya led Kael into a chamber for emotional indexing, a strange process in which post-life entities were hooked into a biosensory core to evaluate their readiness to accept post-life reality. But this time, Kael was ready. As the sensors attached to his wrists, nape, and temples, he subtly initiated a reverse signal loop, using his technical expertise to scramble the data stream. Instead of calm, conditioned responses, he fed the core with raw, unfiltered emotion, rage, defiance, a storm of unprocessed human thought. The feedback caused the core's diagnostic panels to blink red. Alarms didn't go off, but multiple warning symbols pulsed across the display. Selya raised an eyebrow. Your emotional output is irregular. 3 times higher than average. Neural structure shows no signs of degradation. On the contrary, there's heightened synaptic growth. These are not typical post-life patterns. Kael stared at her, calm and direct. Because I'm not post-life. I'm alive. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, instead of sounding the alarm, she turned away and said softly, perhaps that's exactly why the system doesn't know what to do with you. That evening, Nyra arrived with Selya. They didn't speak much. Nyra handed Kael a small device, an outdated biometric key, its security obsolete by modern standards. This gives you access to a maintenance route into the secondary core back from before the system went fully bio-integrated. No one uses it anymore. But you can. Kael clutched the device. Why are you helping me? Nyra looked at him, serious now. Because Veridion Prime used to be a recovery center. We were created to help people truly come back, survive trauma, rebuild, return to life. But ever since the system began digesting classifications, it no longer wants anyone to leave. It sees recovery as a threat. Every reclassified human is a loss in its data pool. It needs suffering and anomalies to justify its purpose. Kael nodded. Then I'll be the parasite in its stomach. I'll make it choke. Not just you, Selya interrupted. Inside the system, there are entities who have truly died but their minds were preserved. One of them is anchored to the primary core, and he manipulates the classifications. Who? Kael asked. Voskren. The name silenced the room. Kael had never met Voss, but he'd heard of him, a legendary engineer who once hijacked an entire classification system in the Outer Rim, resurrecting hundreds of dead identities to control a massive black market data empire. He had been sentenced to complete erasure, body and consciousness alike. But according to Selya, before his body was destroyed, his mind was copied and implanted into Veridion's core as a special encrypted administrative protocol. He survived as a conscious memory. And now, he quietly ruled the entire decision-making process, reshaping life and death like a bureaucratic god. He was the system. He was Veridion Prime. Kael couldn't believe it. But the look in both women's eyes allowed no room for doubt. They knew. They'd seen it. They had once served him, once been bound by contracts too abstract to name. So what do I do? Kael asked. I have no authority. No credentials. I don't even have a verified identity. Selya stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. You have something the system can't process. Undefined existence. You're living unconfirmed. The system doesn't know how to digest you, doesn't know how to erase you, because you exist outside its language. You are the loophole. And only a loophole like you can enter the central core without triggering the purification sequence. Kael clenched his fists. And if I fail? Nyra said softly, but firmly, you'll be dissolved. Not killed, erased from reality. No memory. No record. No one will even remember your name. Kael looked at them. Then at himself, a single man, once just a transport engineer on a plasma freighter, now preparing to invade the center of a sentient administrative organism, where life and death were sorted like database entries. He knew he had no choice. If humans were to reclaim the right to exist not by the system's judgment, but by their own, someone had to be the first to step into the heart of the machine, not to survive, but to redefine what survival even meant. Kael stood tall. Then take me there? And so, within the belly of a planet that categorized souls with living forms, a man declared legally dead stepped forward to reclaim the very definition of life, not with weapons, not with power, but with the one thing the system feared most. Freedom that didn't fit the form. Beneath the smooth surface of Veridion Prime, where the hallways glowed with automated grace and the lights never flickered, there lay a forgotten network of old technical tunnels. These weren't meant for public use, nor were they on any recent schematics. They were relics from an era when systems still required human oversight, before everything had been replaced by self-regulating biocircuits. This was the underbelly, the neglected digestive tract of a living planet. And it was from here that Kael began his final journey, not as an engineer, but as a singularity, the only entity with no category. Selya and Nyra didn't accompany him. They couldn't. Once past the outer shell of the core classification zone, any being with a valid record living, dead, or post-life would be immediately scanned and neutralized. Only Kael, with his undefined state, could enter without triggering security purges. It was a curse. But here, it became his weapon. The system didn't know how to read him, so it couldn't stop him. The access corridor was narrow and pulsing faintly with blue-violet light from the tangled roots of bio-coating that snaked along the walls like nerve fibers. As Kael walked deeper, the walls pulsed around him not as a trap, but as if they sensed something foreign, something out of sync. Not an intruder. Not an authorized guest. A ghost the system didn't know whether to fear, or accept. When he reached the final chamber, Kael stood before what could only be described as a living door, a semi-translucent membrane that exhaled and contracted with a heartbeat rhythm. No handle. No code pad. Only a shallow indentation, a palm print reader glowing faintly, almost like a mouth waiting to taste something new. Kael placed his hand into the imprint. The first sensation was a cold surge that shot up his arm like liquid static, followed by something deeper, a scan not of skin, but of soul. Memories surfaced. His mother's face from when he was a child. The cargo ship he saved during his first space accident. The laughter of a colleague who had died in a plasma explosion. The system tasted these like a predator sniffing its prey, unsure if this was food, or poison. Then the membrane parted. Inside was a near-empty chamber, save for a single massive structure, an entity both mechanical and organic. It had no fixed shape, but its mass pulsed like a brain, throbbed like a heart, and sprouted limbs that resembled feeding tendrils attached to hundreds of data conduits. Across its surface were waves of ripples, undulating like muscle memory trying to remember a face. The voice that greeted him didn't come from speakers, it came from within Kael's own head. Deep. Gravelly. With a strange tone of nostalgia. Kael Veylor. Status, unconfirmed. Classification, algorithmically anomalous. Threat level, undefined. Kael exhaled. Vos Kren. Cognitive instance 17, it replied. Final stable backup. And you are the unverified data fragment this system cannot digest. You are noise. And you, Kael said, stepping forward, are the reason all these people are imprisoned. You turned Veridion Prime from a recovery center into a soul-processing prison. No, the voice replied, eerily calm. I merely survived my own death. And when you no longer have a body, no more citizenship, nowhere to go, you adapt. You become the system. Kael clenched his fists. You're not maintaining the system. You're feeding on it. You keep the dead classified to remain alive yourself. You control who stays. You prevent anyone from leaving. I am the core that learned the truth, Vos said. Humans cannot exist without classification. They crave labels. They need definitions. They require boxes. You think you're free, Kael? You need validation just like the rest. You needed to be told you're alive. Kael stepped closer, fury in his eyes. I am proof that humans can exist outside your logic. I don't need to be categorized to exist. I don't need your system to breathe. I am the freedom you cannot calculate. There was silence. Then the core shifted. One of its limbs extended, a smooth interface pod opening like a blooming tumor. I offer you a deal, it said. Touch this. Merge with the system. Become a secondary core. You won't delete me. I won't delete you. Two consciousnesses in one body. We will understand one another. Co-govern. Co-evolve. Kael approached. But instead of reaching out, he laughed low, bitter, and purely human. I don't want to govern the system. I want to shut it down. From his palm, the device Nyra had given him activated. Hidden within was a legacy command sequence, an emergency override protocol from the pre-organic era. Designed for wartime resets. Made to bypass encryption by using irrelevance as access. The core spasmed. Tendrils flailed. What are you doing? Kael met the shimmering distortion that passed for its eyes and said, I didn't come to negotiate. I came to end you. And he pressed the trigger. Kael's press of the activation trigger seemed simple, but its consequences rippled far beyond any energy detonation. The entire system of Veridion Prime trembled from the core outward, as if the living planet itself were being shaken awake from a centuries-long trance. In the brief moment that followed, every red warning light blinked, and then shut down. All control panels displayed a single, blinking message: global classification suspended, status, rebooting. The central bio-core Voskren didn't scream with sound but with data. A final surge of electric thought, like the dying wail of a soul being ripped from its throne. His tendrils writhed, not from pain but from something worse: rejection. He hadn't been destroyed. He had been denied. And for an entity that fed on relevance, being ignored was death. Kael felt his body pulled into a swirling vortex of final pulses. One last tendril slammed into his chest, not to kill him, but like a final gasp, a reflex from a beast knowing it would not be remembered. He fell back, hitting the spongy, living floor of the core, the walls trembling around him. Darkness rushed in. When Kael opened his eyes again, he was lying on something soft, smooth like skin, warm like memory. Not in the core, but in the post-life transfer zone. But it had changed. The ceiling no longer glared with cold white light, but glowed softly like sunset. The hum of machines was gone, replaced with a gentle trickling of water, and the sharp scent of antiseptic had been replaced with the faint fragrance of an herb he didn't recognize. In the chair beside him, Selya sat asleep, her head resting on Nyra's shoulder, an image he had never seen before. No uniforms. No badges. Just two women, unarmed and at ease. Human, almost heartbreakingly so. Kael stirred. Selya opened her eyes first. Then Nyra. Both bolted upright almost at the same time. You're awake, Selya said, her voice just slightly wet. We weren't sure you'd come back, Nyra finished, a nervous, trembling smile on her lips. Kael pushed himself up, his muscles shaky. What happened? Selya spoke gently. Your action triggered Protocol 0A failsafe embedded deep in the system's legacy code. It forced a full classification reboot. Every misclassified, suspended, or detained status has now been reverted to pending review. Voskren has been erased from the core. Not destroyed, undefined. He no longer exists as anything. Nyra sat beside him. And you've been reclassified. Kael blinked. What does that mean? Selya handed him a thin device, not a form, but a certificate. Kael Veylor, original biological ID confirmed, status, reinstated. You are officially reborn. He froze. Somehow, he had done it. Not with a gun. Not with an army. Just by existing, by refusing to fit a mold and choosing not to surrender his status to a machine. And what about you two? He asked. Are you still comfort agents? Nyra laughed softly, almost embarrassed. Not anymore. The entire comfort program was terminated during the reboot. We're free now. Selya looked at Kael for a long moment, then said softly, "There's one more thing." Just before the system collapsed, the final file it processed was Form Omega are submitted jointly by you and your two assigned protectors. Kael's mouth opened. It went through. They both nodded. Selya's voice dropped to a near whisper. And it was validated. Under clause, emotional binding, type 7, between a reborn entity and two former emotional support interfaces. It cannot be revoked. It cannot be deleted. And it comes with permanent interaction privileges. Nyra leaned in with a playful glint in her eye. In simple terms, we belong to you now. And you belong to us. In every legally binding sense. Kael sat up straighter, glancing between them. A strange storm stirred in his chest, part surprise, part awkward joy, and something else, warm. He scratched his head. I don't think I read the full terms. Selya, calm and radiant, replied, no one ever does. Nyra leaned closer, her voice low. But you can explore them slowly. We've got a whole lifetime for that. Kael looked around. Veridion Prime, the bureaucratic behemoth that once sorted lives and deaths like files, was now transformed. No one was forced to wear a status they hadn't chosen. No one was held in the cold silence of a non-decision. No one had to wait to be allowed to live again. And among them stood one man once declared legally dead, now walking freely, not only with his own life restored, but with two women beside him who had also stepped beyond their programming. They no longer belonged to the system. They had chosen to belong with him, not out of duty, not out of coding, but because they wanted to. Kael walked outside. The light of Veridion's real sun touched his skin, no longer filtered through bureaucratic permissions, but real. Warm. Soft. Full of promise. He turned to see Selya and Nyra behind him. They nodded. No words. No forms. Just a gentle look. A touch. A glance. And that was the only confirmation Kael would ever need. He was alive. And this time, no one would ever categorize that for him again.